Okay, everybody. Hi there, and Assalamu alaikum for the Arab people. This is Professor Abdullah Mutwalli. I am the General Supervisor for Naseej Academy. And we are starting now the first session of our series of webinar. And we are happy to have Dr. Martha Kyrillidou. Her name only just give this impression that we will get very good knowledge about measuring library services. And for sure that when we're talking about LibQUAL, it's imitating and it's focusing on our guest today. I will not talk too much. We give this 5 minutes or 7 minutes exactly at the beginning to let the people who having some issues to preparing the IT things to not miss anything from the webinar. I will leave the stage for Martha, and will be happy to receive your question at the end of the session. Martha, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I do want to welcome everybody for joining me today. We will talk about measuring library service quality and how the academic libraries do it efficiently and effectively. As many of you know, I have been doing research in this area for a long time. I do want you to take a minute and find on your screen where the chat for the Zoom screen is. You will find the chat session. If you cannot see it at the bottom of your screen, you can find it under More. You can click there and you can see chat. This is where we want you to write your questions. And at the end of my presentation, I will read the questions and we will answer many of your questions. And on that note, let's get started. So what is library service quality? Quality, much like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. Service quality, oops, I just go back to presentation mode. Here we are. Quality is a concept that was studied a lot in the manufacturing world in the 60s when the Japanese were producing a lot of cars and transistors and radios. They focused on creating better gadgets. So the concept of quality has decades old roots, but a group of researchers about 30, 40 years ago focused on the issue of service quality. What does quality mean in a bank, at a hotel, in a library? And these researchers, Barry Zatham and Parasuraman, were instrumental in developing this concept through a multi-phased and multi-year research agenda. So the library world took their concepts and used them in improving library services. So key concepts include the concept of library expectations and library perceptions. What is it you expect when you go to a library? What is it you perceive when you experience that service? So the expectations and perceptions someone has sometimes are confirmed and they experience an excellent service, and sometimes they are disconfirmed and they are experiencing failure in that service. And there are many pain points in delivering excellent library service. We're going to call those pain points gaps, because the theory of service quality that the researchers Barry Zatham and Parasuraman delivered to us is the gap theory. So there are gaps in communication at a number of areas. And the first gap is the market information gap. This is the gap between what library visitors are expecting and what the top management understands their expectations are. For example, the people who visit the library may expect to see comfortable furniture, new furniture, but the top management may think that the visitors only care about the books and the collections and the information. So that's a gap in the way the top management perceives the library users' expectations to be. Another important gap is the service standards gap. And this is the gap between the top management's expectations and what the library's service standards may be. For example, if the library management thinks that an interlibrary loan transaction that takes a week to be delivered is acceptable, they are going to set a service standard that says a week-long waiting period to get an interlibrary loan transaction is acceptable. But a user who's used to instant delivery of information these days will not be satisfied. A third gap of miscommunication includes the service performance gap. And this is the gap between the library's service standards and the way the library performs in delivering the service. And an example I'm going to give you here is actually a real-life example. Let's say a library advertises that they close at 9 o'clock at night, that their service standards for the hours of operation indicates at 9 o'clock p.m. the library closes. So a user who checks out a book can go to the service desk theoretically up until 9 p.m. and check out the book. But the library needs to turn off the computers at the circulation desk 15 minutes before the library closes, so the people from the circulation desk can leave at 9 p.m. So a user who goes to the circulation desk at 8:45, they are going to have, they're not going to be able to check out their book, and the service performance they will experience will be a failure. And that's a service performance gap. The fourth gap is the internal communication gap. And this is what the library service, how the library service is performed, and what we say to the external world, what we communicate to the external world, the library is delivering. An example of that would be, let's say, advertising that a library offers classes, and someone comes to take an information literacy class in the library, and suddenly that class is canceled. That is a gap in the communication. So all of those gaps, gap one, the information gap, gap two, the gap between top management's expectations and the quality specifications, gap three, the gap between the specifications and the delivery of the service, and gap four, the gap between the way we deliver the service and the way we communicate the delivery of the service, contribute to what we define as gap five, the gap between what we expect to find and experience when we visit a library and how we actually live through that experience, how we perceive that experience. So that's gap five, and that's the service quality gap. It's very important to remember that all the other gaps contribute to gap five. So Barry Zaitham and Parasuraman developed a whole theory of service quality that has an element of an important instrument there that measures gap 5. And gap 5, as you can see on this chart here, is the service quality gap, as we said, between expected service and perceived service. The expectations of the service is because of prior experiences, because of our needs, because of what we've heard before. All of that forms those expectations. What is communicated also is important in forming those expectations. But sometimes, because of those pain points, we experience these gaps. And this gap has been, the gap between expectations and perceptions has been successfully measured based on a lot of research, based on a lot of data collection and conversations with users that experience and consume services. The gap has been measured, and the dimensions of service quality have been conceptualized with a series of constructs that you see here, 10 constructs. The dimensions of service quality include access to the service, communication about the service, the competency of the people who deliver the service, their courtesy, how credible they are, how reliable they are, how responsive they are, the security, how secure we feel in the environment that delivers the service, some of the tangible things like the furniture, and also the understanding the organization has about the user, how deeply the organization knows the user. So we took the theory of service quality developed by Berry, Zathelm, and Parasuraman and used it in libraries for many years. And we did see that libraries were using the model called LibQUAL, which is the one developed by Berry, Zathelm, and Parasuraman. But we also recognize that LibQUAL does not quite fit the library reality. So we did additional conversations and interviews with many library users in academic libraries and modified the original LibQUAL into what ended up being the LibQUAL model of library service quality. The LibQUAL model went through an evolution and tested a number of survey items derived from the interviews. And through the phase you see here in 2003, it actually had 4 dimensions. Right now we have collapsed those 4 to 3 dimensions. But you can see on this slide that in 2003, the 4 dimensions are as good as the 3 dimensions, but 3 dimensions is a little bit more efficient. So the 4 dimensions that we conceptualized and measured include access to information, effect of service. Effect of service is the way the employees in the library deliver the service. Library as place. It's 5 questions about how the environment is safe and comfortable. And the 4th concept, personal control, is about the ability of the user to navigate the information environment. For each one of those concepts, we have survey questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what is important to take out of this slide is that we've adapted LibQUAL in developing LibQUAL, and we were able to come with 4 key constructs in the 4-dimension model, or 3 key concepts in the 3-dimension model of LibQUAL. And here is the 3-dimension model of LibQUAL. Affective service includes the empathy library staff has in understanding the library users' needs, how responsive they are, can they deliver quickly, how they provide assurance, and how they are perceived as being reliable and trustworthy. The library is place dimension includes questions that ask about the library as refuge. You know, people can find safety there, the symbolic nature of the library, or how the library can be a useful place to be to study and relax. And the third dimension, the information control dimension, is a complex dimension that includes both access to information as well as the information itself. So the scope of the content the library delivers, the convenience with which it delivers that content, how easy it is to navigate, how intuitive it is, how it delivers information in a timely fashion, whether it has all the equipment it needs to deliver information, from photocopiers that work to machines that work to Wi-Fi that works, and nowadays to even you know, data visualization and other technologies, and how it helps the user to be self-reliant. Ideally, the user should be able to navigate the library and the information world on their own and find what they need on their own. Every time a user may have to come and ask a question at the reference desk or at the information desk could theoretically be perceived as sort of a service failure, right? In an environment where you want people to be self-reliant. So we've seen how the theory of service quality has been modified to a theory of library service quality. So let's see how exactly are we measuring these concepts and look at what the actual standardized survey part of LibQUAL looks like. So the survey that's called LibQUAL has 22 core questions, and they represent the 3 dimensions we just discussed. It also has 5 optional questions, so a library can suggest their questions. It has a couple of information literacy questions, some general satisfaction questions, library usage questions. Do you use the library on a daily basis, weekly, monthly? We also ask about web usage, some general demographics, and of course there is a free comments box. Now, for many years, for about 10 years, we delivered this model of 22 core survey items and a bunch of additional information, but people behave on the internet as time is shrinking, so they want to be able to do more in less time. So we worked on taking a protocol that was pretty lengthy for the internet era and made it shorter. So we developed the LibQUAL Lite version, where all the questions on the survey are asked, but the respondents answer only a random sample of the 22 questions that's presented to them. And this way, the survey time for filling in the survey is reduced, and we see a large increase in response rates. So the LibQUAL Lite version includes only 8 core questions, 1 local question, 1 information literacy question, only 2 general satisfaction questions, 3 library usage items. It still includes the demographics and the comment box. So let's see how these questions look like. Because of our desire to measure gap 5, the gap between expectations and perceptions, we have adopted the ServQual structure of answering questions. So for each one of the questions, the user is presented with 3 scales. One scale that asks about the minimum service level in experiencing that service. Here the question is employees who instill confidence in users. So the person who comes to the survey is being asked to tell us, when it comes to employees who instill confidence in users in this library, what is your minimum service level expectation? So the minimum service level expectation is measured with this scale between 1 and 9. The library user is also asked to provide the desired service level expectation, again by providing a rating from between 1 and 9. And the last scale of 9 points is the perception scale. The library user is asked to rate how they experienced the service. How was their perception of the service performance? So for each one of the questions, we have the minimum service level, the desired service level, and the library's perceived service performance. So there are important key terms to remember when you look at these scales. The zone of tolerance is the area between minimum and desired expectations. The area between the perception score minus the minimum expectations score has actually a technical term called adequacy mean score. And the area between the perception score and the desired score, the desired expectations, is called the superiority mean score. So both the adequacy gap score and the superiority gap scores are important concepts that are derived from the way we use the scales. And of course, the zone of tolerance concept. So let's take a closer look at these key terms. You see here, you have question 1, and we had 9 points on a scale. The minimum score might have been 3. The desired score might have been 8. And the perceived score, in this case, is 6. So the area between the minimum and the desired, the blue and the green dot, is the zone of tolerance. The area between the blue dot, the minimum expectations, and the yellow dot is the adequacy gap score. And the area between the yellow dot and the green dot, between the perception, the yellow dot, and the desired expectation, the green dot, is the superiority gap score. So these 3 scales and these concepts help us basically. I'll go back for a minute here and show you the radar chart. These 3 concepts basically help us develop these graphics, whether it's a radar chart or a floating bar chart. In the radar chart, the outer line here, the outer line of the yellow, are the desired scores for the most part. The most inner line here of the blue are the minimum expectation scores. And typically, perceptions typically are between minimum and desired expectations. So where blue meets yellow is where the perceptions are for the most part. We've had situations where perceptions can be less than minimum expectations, and this is failure in delivering service. And we've had situations where perceptions exceed desired expectations, and one may make the argument that we're over-investing in this area. So the radar chart works this way. Every spoke represents a question here. in the bar chart, the floating bar chart picture on the right side, you can actually see the 4 dimensions. And here, the minimum expectation score is the bottom of the blue bar, and the desired expectation score is the top of the blue bar. And then the perceptions score starts where the red smaller bar starts. So you can see the perceptions in all these examples are within the zone of tolerance. And that's a brief introduction to interpreting LibQUAL scores. So let's move on and highlight a couple of other very important characteristics of the protocol. We do ask demographic information, as I mentioned before, and we do it for a couple of important reasons. We ask that you also provide the number of people you have, the number of students and faculty you have in some of the demographic categories. In particular, here on this slide, you can see that we collect data on the disciplines users come from. And we are able to map the number of people that respond to what you told us are the number of people you have, students and faculty you have in each one of these categories. So you can create what we call the representativeness graph that tells us how close the responses to the survey we got represent the profile that we have in our institution. And this is something I would recommend you always do when you do surveys, making sure your data represent your population, or if they don't, being aware that they don't and know what your data represent. So let's move on beyond the survey logistics to some of the outcomes libraries experience when they do LibQUAL. And some of these ideas are ideas we got from the many libraries, more than 1,300 libraries across the globe that have implemented LibQUAL. So they were able to secure additional funding to increase resources. They were able to improve the liaison program they have with academic staff in the departments, to get money sometimes to increase ebooks, to increase journal subscriptions sometimes. They were able to implement cross-searching of the databases based on the feedback they got from their users, to improve the library website, to develop online information literacy tools and resources, to improve the provision of service via 24/7 chat, cooperative services. More ideas libraries have implemented. They've added enhanced computing, printing, and photocopying services. They've upgraded their catalog, only quick search stations. They introduced express PCs. So sometimes, you know, if a library has a lot of PCs that are heavily used, people don't get to use the computers the library has, and they leave disappointed. So a number of libraries have created a small group of PCs that are there for short time use only, with maximum logins of 20 minutes as an example here. Many libraries have been able to increase study spaces based on the feedback, especially undergraduate students provide. They reduced access to external visitors at busy times, introduced specialized study areas for researchers, introduced improved study zones to control noise. Noise control has become almost a science in our library buildings. We have our very busy areas, medium busy areas, complete silent floors or corners. And libraries have also improved temperature and ventilation. So libraries is not only about books, it's about the holistic experience of the service. Here I'm going to give you an overview of a comment provided by a library. This was a comment one of the users of this library provided. He said, the library is one of the most oppressingly depressing locations on the face of the earth. Its ugly decor and offensive lighting note the soul, and the carpeting is an invitation to madness. Well, this library was able to get a 14 million improvement program that helped them renovate the library, expand the collection, and increase study space. So many libraries have implemented LibQUAL. These are all the countries that are represented in the 35 languages. We've translated the survey. The Arabic language version has been implemented by the Arabian Gulf University, King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals, Kingdom University, Qatar University, University of Applied Science, and University of Bahrain. I believe the most recent implementations were from Qatar University and University of Bahrain. If you would like to get more information, you can reach to colleagues in those institutions. So to summarize, why do a LibQUAL survey? Because it focuses on measuring the gap between perceptions and expectations. It also helps you compare your scores and data with those other institutions that have done LibQUAL. And we've been able to develop norms based on the large corpus of data we have and understand performance across time and understand the transformation libraries are going. But LibQUAL is not the only tool. There are many tools, and sometimes there is little time to implement them, but I do want to make justice and mention many of the efforts that are out there. Ithaca SNR has been developing surveys that look carefully into the behavior and attitudes of faculty and students. There is a standardized assessment of information literacy skills, SAILS. There is a survey instrument that is basically a battery of questions for measuring information service outcomes. Many of the smaller liberal arts institutional libraries have implemented that here in the US. And I do want to mention that Australia and the UK have their own standardized versions of various surveys that institutions, in addition to implementing standardized surveys, they develop their own local surveys sometimes. They deploy new methods about focusing on the user experience, where that gives you the ability to collect quick data through intercepts, through whiteboards. So we are focusing more systematically on the user, on the library user, understanding them and making sure we're delivering experiences that are useful to them. Now, remember, to lead change in a library and in an academic environment, sometimes noticing these gaps you are measuring is not a bad thing. It helps you understand the changes that need to happen, and it helps you shift expectations and manage perceptions. So, don't be afraid of getting the data and be ready to engage with the data, to use them, to interpret them, and to turn them into beneficial outcomes for library users. Do strategic gap analysis and strategic communication is becoming an important function of libraries. 4 years ago, I established my own library consulting firm, Quality Metrics, that focuses on these issues. Uh, it deeply engages in understanding all the pain points libraries have, and we use multiple methods, both qualitative and quantitative methods, in understanding our users. And I would like to thank you, and let's move towards the Q&A and the chat box and see what questions we have there. Okay, this is coming from Mrs. Sahar Sobey. How can we ensure that respondents are not confused between the minimum desired and perceived services? It's not clear the difference between the three and the minds of the respondents, especially the students. Rating the perceptions only makes more sense, or even the desired and perceived, just 2 out of the 3. Rating 3 concepts causes confusion. It is a more complex response pattern to have the 3. It offers a unique interpretation. You do have to make some of these choices. If you prefer a simple satisfaction score, we do have those scales in LibQUAL. You can definitely create a very short survey, much easier to fill in. But there is a place for something more complex, but I would say there's definitely a place for implementing simpler surveys as well. So it's not only about using only one method. Let me see, this came in the Q&A box. I think the chat box may have more things. And I'm going to see if I can maximize this. All right, we have people from Beirut, and the note that this webinar is a question if this webinar is recorded and whether they can have the recording. I will let the organizers get back to you on that. Let's see here. One university library is enough for PhD thesis using LibQUAL. Oh, someone is doing their PhD thesis. I think depending on what aspect of LibQUAL you're measuring, there are many, there's a lot of research done in this area. I don't think it's an issue of, one or multiple. I think it depends on the specific question and improvements and, concepts you are testing for your PhD thesis, and whether your advisors are comfortable with what you're proposing. We have a thank you there. I would like to ask you about any specific standards for library services for students with disabilities, especially low vision and blind users. Thank you so much for asking that question. You may know that the Library of Congress does have a whole service for physically blind library users. It's a national service that provides the books and the resources in Braille, and provides, machines, and there's a whole network of libraries. In every state, there is a state library agency that works with the Library of Congress here. So these materials can be delivered to the people with the vision problems. With an aging population, vision problems are becoming more acute here in the US. I know in some of the countries where you have a more of a youth wave, so you may not have to confront vision aging problems. One other group of disabled library patrons I would like to mention, because we haven't paid a lot of attention and there is a lot happening lately. People who have hearing impairments, the deaf and the deaf culture, they have been reaching libraries and asking for better services. Can I apply LibQUAL scale in my library personally? Yeah, you can modify it. A number of people have done local modifications. I would emphasize that it's a modified version. Right now LibQUAL is offered through the Association of Research Libraries, and that's LibQUAL, but you can modify it like we modified ServQUAL. Thanks for the information. How can I be a professional librarian? Well, it's different in different countries. In the US, a professional library degree is considered to be the master's in library science. So you have to have a bachelor's in some area, and then you get a master's in library and information science. What is the difference between LibQUAL and LibQUAL Lite? So LibQUAL is a long form static survey. LibQUAL Lite is a short form, so it dynamically randomly selects items from the 22 core items, so it's much shorter. And they have the same, they use the same questions. It's just the presentation of the survey that is different to the user. What do you think about marketing the idea of bringing your own device instead of providing users with our electronic devices? Yeah, more and more of our users have their own devices, their own computers, their own iPhones and portable phones and smartphones. I think libraries are moving more and more in that area. So I would encourage you, if your market is ready, to take advantage of that. What's the professional academic librarian? Yeah, it's probably a concept primarily here in the United States, where to have sort of a library professional position, you need to have a master's level degree, and people who do not have that and have only bachelor's degree are typically considered support level employees. But to tell you the truth, in smaller libraries, you may only have someone with a bachelor's degree running the library. So, keep that in mind. Some of the network connections were not very good. Thank you, Dr. Martha, for this useful webinar. Many thanks for Naseej, a Ph.D. researcher, Amira Ahmed, and they've published measuring the quality of Menofia University Library Services by using LibQUAL in Egypt. Good. Just want to ask about some point. Is there an indication for numbers from 1 to 9? Yes, there is. Or does it indicate only best? Oh, no, it is just a scale. There is a number there, but there's not a word associated with each number. Are there grants to countries? Yes, there is actually a LibQUAL grant every year. LibQUAL asks libraries who have not done LibQUAL before to apply for a grant. There is an application process open right now, so some of you may want to go on the ARL website. The grants are not for attending the conference. The grants LibQUAL offers is for the cost of the LibQUAL survey, which is about $3,000. The PowerPoint, can they have the PowerPoint? Yes, from my perspective, I think you can get a copy.
Martha, if you allow me, just because I found this question just repeated many times, I just comment on this one, and I'll keep my question at the end of the of the session. All the attendees, only just attendees, will receive a certificate for attending this session, signed by Dr. Martha. And at the same time, the whole video will be published on Naseej Academy website after making the editing and this stuff. So just this is a comment between us, just to close this area. The PowerPoint presentation also will be available again on the queue of our material and our session. So back to you again, Martha, to continue on your question.
Thank you. There is an interesting question that just came. We have a shortage of academic users and researchers visiting the library, and I guess they are using the internet and the free information available, and it is difficult to attract users. It's not an environment anymore where the library is a monopoly and has information that no one else has. There are plenty of information sources nowadays, and it is indeed much more difficult, much more challenging to attract users. And that's why many libraries are developing outreach services. And they are developing outreach librarian roles, whose role is to go to not only study the users who come to the library, which is what LibQUAL does primarily, but to go out into the communities and to study the needs of the community and to engage with the community. And many of the user experience methods we are using is about engaging the community in designing new kinds of services libraries can offer. So I would say, the traditional, typical library role of being behind a desk, being inside the building is not necessarily what will help libraries survive in the future. Going out, engaging the community, even taking the library into the community. There are pop-up library services. Many public libraries are delivering. They create partnerships with other civic organizations. They try to embed the library in the life of the users. So a lot more of that will be happening in the years to come. In the academic environment, I think it's worth highlighting, partnerships libraries create with disciplines, different departments. Sometimes they create disciplines with other civic organizations. The ACRL Academic Library Excellence Award for the Research Library category went to the University of Maryland. And one of the things they did, if you go and read the information they provided to get the award, was a partnership with Libraries Without Borders. And it is this kind of service and outreach project that sort of gave them the prominence to one of these, that it was one of the elements that gave them the award. Another college that got an award this year is in California, a community college, the Santa Rosa Junior College. And in there, they highlight how they work with the learning communities the students form on campus, whether they are from different ethnic groups or whether they are on a specific interest, academic or a hobby. The one key interesting element they highlighted in their application, in that area there were fires, devastating fires, and the library opened its doors to be the place where people can stay and be safe and be saved from the fires. So, some of those the services and an openness the libraries develop are very useful in attracting users. Thanks, Dr. Martha. Satisfied the users is not, especially in the Middle East. People are more critical. Yeah, probably. Openness to information is not always comfortable in everywhere, and even, here. Appreciate value importance of books and libraries. Yeah, books continue to be important. Audiobooks are emerging in their presence and utility in libraries. And there'll be new forms of information, probably every month, every year, new databases. So I hope we are all ready to embrace the brave new world of information and deliver comfortable, inviting, and fulfilling and productive experiences to our library users for many years to come. I think the trail of questions is stopping, so I would like to take the time to say thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Martha. Kyrillidou so much. We are glad to you. And only one question I have. I knew you through your researches and books, and I'm happy to meet you face to face in previous opportunity and now. So I think that it's just an appetizer for the people who are interested in measuring library and library services. And I encourage them to read more about your research, because I think you digging in deep for a different angle and perception for dealing with this important topic. My question simply is related to the next step the library should take after doing the LibQUAL. And related to that, if there is missing information, like the always sensitive information related to the budget, some libraries just caution to provide with. So what's your opinion about doing this by themselves, and also what's the next step the library should do it after doing this survey?
Yeah, it does take effort and time to do it by yourself. So, one of the reasons the service IRL provides has been successful is because it does save libraries time and effort. Now, you are asking a very important question. What do you do next? You have all these data. You have these scores. One of the most useful immediate next steps I have seen was developing what has been called the Library Summit, where you bring the users together into, a forum of 30, 40, 50, 60 people and discuss with them what you found. And you get a deeper understanding of what are some remedial actions you can do. The outreach services ideas come sometimes from these follow-up activities. So there is information on the LibQUAL website on the concept of the Library Summit. There's a flyer. A few libraries have implemented it. I would highly recommend it.
Very good. I think we have last question here, and I found that it's very valuable one. So it's related to the acceptable percentage for the survey to be valid.
Yeah, I think it means what's the acceptable response
Exactly,
percentage, and it's
Dr.
not a
Rajab,
yeah, it's not a percent necessarily you are after, it's representativeness you are after. So if you have a completely random sample that's representative, you can do random sampling with 30, 40 people, and you can just have the normal curve reflected in your data. It's an exercise every introductory statistics person, gets taught. If you have a statistics class with 30 people teaching them introductory statistics, you ask them to every student to point into a random number and tell you what the number is, and you start charting those numbers on a graph, and you suddenly see you have after 30 or so observations, you start having the random the normal curve there. So that's because of this quality of randomization. So if you truly have random data, you are going to have representative data. So it is not an issue of percentage, it's an issue of randomization.
Okay. I would like to thank you again and thank you all the attendees that participate, because the success of this session mainly about the attendees and for sure our speaker, and for sure we will have more with Dr. Martha, and I would invite you to the next webinar. I will keep the title hidden until the 31 of March. So we have the next seminar in 31 of March, and it will be about something that help the libraries to save some money and also to face the crisis they can find about the budget. Again, thank you all, and thank you, Martha, and we will be in touch for the coming months for another webinar. Thank you again, and thank you for everybody attending this one. You have me.